this Nuyem event, starting by way of gratitudes, giving thanks for all of our relations, for the two-legged, for the four-legged, for the ones that swim, for the ones that fly, for the ones that crawl upon the earth, for the ones we cannot touch with our hands, but that we are touched by deep inside. Giving thanks at this time for our homeland, for the place where the mountains meet the ocean, for the shifting of the tides and the shifting and cycling of the seasons, for all the creatures that call that place home since forever, and all the ways in which the beings that inhabit our homeland make it the wild beauty that it is. Giving thanks and honoring that meeting place of land and people, the coming together of land and people, and the ways in which that land and environment shapes the people who call it home. Honoring the ways in which our homeland has shaped and influenced and inspired our language, our tools, our songs, our stories, our way of life, our clothing, our traditions, our ceremonies. Giving thanks for that ever-strengthening place of connectedness of land and people. And honoring and giving thanks at this time for all the knowledge that has survived and continues to survive through us, through the hearts of the people, all the things that they couldn't take from us, all the ways in which that knowledge continues on in our blood memory, in our voice, in our heartbeats, coming together in a good way, in a loving way, in a sacred way. And giving thanks for all the things that nourish and uphold our wellness, all the things that uphold our wellness emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally, all the many different shapes that medicine takes to nourish us and keep us well emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally. And giving thanks and honoring the knowledge keepers of our nation and the ways in which that knowledge is passed on. And giving thanks for the coming together of hearts in a good way, in a loving way, in a sacred way, and all that will come. Giving thanks for all that will come from this coming together of hearts at this time. Wah.
Awesome, thank you. Your drum sounded really nice today. Actually just picked mine up the other day, and Trent came over and we had a meal, and I ended up gifting his boy a little drum. First little drum, so he played mine, and he was really enjoying himself, and I had an extra little one kicking around, so I gifted it to him. I also sent his mom a whole bunch of the songs that I sing and recording, and she plays it for him all the time. So usually when he's getting really excited or something like that, I start singing, and he really pays attention. So I'm really glad that he's getting the experience of those songs at such a young age.
Children are always so drawn to all the sacred things. Every time I've ever took my drum out somewhere where there's children, they're just like run right for it, and they want to touch it, and they want to bang on it, and just brings my heart so much joy every single time.
Yeah, I think it's a good experience seeing them hit it, and you can see that the youth really respect it, like right from the start, eh? And it's a really exciting thing to hit that drum. I remember when we were in the Kitlope, that was some of my favorite times, was sitting by the big fire we had on the beach playing drumming through the night.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't hold it up anymore. I'm assuming Ab has a really good presentation again today, so I look forward to that. Just a reminder to people maybe watching this and recording to have a notebook around, and you'd be able to take notes when it's applicable. What?
Okay, so I'm going to open up a document here. So I decided to take a look at the different linguists that I've worked with the Haisla language, do a little bit at a time throughout the next few weeks. So we're going to start by taking a look at Hein Vink. So he developed his first orthography sometime in the mid-1970s. So something I should explain here is that he had a number of different writing systems that he used. So I would describe his first orthography as being 1A and 1B because they're very similar to each other. There's just a few differences here and there. So I didn't really think there was enough difference to say, like, this is the first Hindvink orthography, this is the second one. I would classify them as 1A and 1B. So his first orthography, 1A, appears in a language lesson that he put together called A First Course in Haisla. And this came out in 1974. The only copies that I've ever seen go up to about lesson 34 or somewhere around there. And it makes me think that there are a bunch of lessons missing. I would say there's about 18 lessons missing. So I'm not sure what happened to those other lessons. So I don't know if he developed the whole course and part of the lessons went missing somehow, or if he only developed those first 34 or 35 lessons and then didn't go any further. I really have no idea. All I can do is guess as to why there's that many lessons, because I know that there's some missing because each lesson is based on a single sound of the language. And there's more than 34 sounds in the language. I'd say there's closer to 55, somewhere around there. So I would say he's missing about 18 to 20 lessons in that first course in Haisla. Again, I'm not sure why there's that few lessons in that course, but yeah, it's up to speculation. So looking through, I did show some examples of his orthography from that language package recently. So I just want to point out a few things about his first orthography 1A. The first thing that is notable is that he doesn't use any kind of accent markers at all. So it's difficult to tell by reading his writing as to where you place emphasis in words. There's also no apostrophes in front of words that start with vowels. That would come later, but in his first orthography, or 1A orthography, there are no apostrophes in front of vowels at the beginning of words. He also used this A with the two dots, which I talked about before, this umlaut A, and that's the same as the AI that would come later on. So that's the eh sound. Like in the English words met, pet, bet, set, and so on. So that's the way he represented that eh sound, is through the umlaut A. He used a V in place of what would later become a small raised W. So this is how he represented what we call rounded consonants. So like a G and a small raised W sounds like gua, and a rounded K sounds like qua, and so on. So he would spell them with like a GV or a KV, whereas nowadays we would put a G and then a small raised W, or a K and a small raised W. So it takes some getting used to. It's a little bit jarring if you're not used to it, and it can be kind of confusing if you're not sure how his orthography works. Another thing that's kind of confusing is that sometimes he uses a W in place of a U, but not all the time. So sometimes he uses a W for a U. Again, that can be a little bit confusing if you're not sure what's happening there. When it comes to what we call lateral symbols, lateral sounds, those are the sounds like and gl. The way he represented those sounds is through what I talked about before. He used digraphs, so specifically consonantal digraphs. So he used two consonants to represent a single sound. So he used LH in place of what we use now, which is the tilde L, and that's the sound. He used a DH in place of the lambda that we use now. That's gl, that's a DL sound. he used TH for the Bardlanda, which is a tl sound, a TL. And he put an apostrophe on top of a T and followed that with an H for the ejective Bardlanda that we use now, which is the sound. So one of the things that can be kind of problematic is that using TH, it can easily be mistaken for English, the voiceless TH sound in English, or is actually voiced like this or that. It can also be voiceless like thought. But that's one of the problems with using a set of consonants like this, is that people might think of English and apply that to Heinrich's orthography without understanding that it's actually either a kl sound or k. So that's one thing that can happen as a byproduct of that. He did use an apostrophe, kind of a straight looking apostrophe, as a glottal stop. And he did that in the last lesson, 35. So he didn't use it in the previous lessons up to that. That's the last lesson that is in this language package, and it's based around what we call a glottal stop, which is essentially the absence of sound. When you think of your glottis, it's the opening between your vocal cords. When you close your glottis, you're closing off any air that's going through. So you're essentially holding your breath, and that's why it's called a glottal stop. You're stopping air from leaving and going up into your mouth. That's why it's called a glottal stop. So he used this kind of apostrophe as a glottal stop, whereas now we use a different kind of apostrophe. So those are some notable features of 1A of Heinrich's orthography. 1B is a slightly modified version that he used in another project called an advanced course in Heisler. And there's no date on the document. I would say it's probably around 1975 or somewhere around there. That's just speculation on my part. It might have been a year or two after, I'm not really sure. So this is essentially the same as 1A, but it has the addition of acute accents. And to me, it looks almost like the accent marks are drawn in afterwards. So something you have to understand is that in the 70s, they weren't really using like personal computers. They weren't really widely available at that point. So he was using a typewriter to develop these projects. So he might not have had any kind of key that he could use to actually put in accent marks on top of vowels. So that's why I think he drew them in afterwards. That's what it looks like to me. So I'll show you this document a little bit later on, and you can see for yourself. And he did start using this different apostrophe for glottal stop. This is the one that we use now. So something that people should understand is that there are different kinds of apostrophes for different purposes. So if you use the opposite of this, if you use an apostrophe that looks like a 6, that's not the proper one to use for any of the hybrid or any of the Heisler orthographies. From Heinrich's second or his 1B orthography up, this is the one that they would use. This is the one that looks like a 9. So that's the most accurate apostrophe to use in Heisler orthographies. So I've got some examples here of words that I pulled from each of these documents. So HV is Heinrich, that's the way he spelled these words. HYB is short for hybrid, so that's the way we would spell the words now. And then the meaning of the word in English. So this first one, you have an A or an N, and then the umlaut A. So in the hybrid orthography, this would be spelled as N-A-I. So the A-I is what makes that eh sound. So this is nah, nah. and that means snow. The next one here, you have an A. You have a kind of straight looking apostrophe. You have an umlaut A, and then NIX. In the hybrid orthography, this A would be an E. It gets a little confusing because the A and the E can kind of be interchangeable. It's because they're both capable of making an sound. So you could keep it as an A. I tend to prefer to use an E instead. So this would be apostrophe E, then another apostrophe, and then you have the AI, and then the NIX. So this is a Annie, and that is eyebrow. The next one is a mare. So it uses an A, M, and then the umlaut A. In the hybrid orthography, we have an apostrophe E, M, and then AI. So a mare means small, something that is small. The next one is Heider Giada. Heider Giada. He spelled it all as one word. I would separate them into two separate words. And I would replace this EY with an I, because HI says hey. And then replace the umlaut A with AI. So this would be Heider, and then Giada. And it means something along the lines of like, here it is, or this is it here, close to me, the person who's speaking. That's what Giada means. It means it's close to me, the person who is speaking at the moment. The next one is dead. Dead. You can see the way Heinrich spelled it. In the hybrid orthography, it's just D, AI, and then another D. So he tended to use a T in place of the D sound. I'm not quite sure why that is, but dead just sounds like the English word dead. But in high Circular, it means to give. And the next one is Mixamer. Mixamer. You can see the difference in spelling here. Pretty much the same except for the AI at the end. And this means to beat on a drum. Mixamer. And then here's some words from 1B, which is the advanced course in Heisler. So the first one is escuelas. Escuelas. And you can see the way that he wrote it is he kept this A with the two dots, and then he added an acute accent on top. And then in the hybrid orthography, we're replacing the umlaut A with the AI, and we're keeping that accent there. Whenever you see two vowels together like this, like AI, if it's accented, the accent goes on top of the first vowel. So it's always going to be on the A. So this was two A's, it would be on the first A. If it was AU, the accent would still be on the A. And most of the time, this vowel combination will be stressed in the word. It will have the accent on it. Not all the time, but most of the time, it will be accented. So escuelas means goodbye. Or that's the closest English equivalent of it, of what it actually means. The next one, he spelled it as Giathla. Giathla. So I've looked in various dictionaries, and what I found is that it's not an eh sound, it's ah. So that would be represented by an E. So I would say the pronunciation is Giathla. Giathla. And this means to put down an object. And this next one is Menesut. Menesut. So he has the umlaut A with the apostrophe or the accent mark on top. So we're replacing the AI, we're putting that in place of the umlaut A, and this is a sibling of the same gender. So those are some examples. And I mentioned before that I have developed my own custom keyboards. That's how I type these. I have a keyboard for Heinvink's first orthography. I have a separate keyboard for a second one. I have one for Lincoln and Rath as well. So that's how I was able to type these and get these symbols like the umlaut A.
Hey, Ab, is it an actual keyboard? Like, did you replace the keys?
No,
Sometimes you can do that.
it's a virtual keyboard.
Okay.
So you use your regular keyboard, but you use like a series of keys. Like when I'm typing an accented A, I type a semicolon and then an A. Then what happens is that it automatically joins them together. So that's basically the way virtual keyboards work. So those are some examples from 1A and 1B. So I'll show you his advanced course in Heisla. So he has an introduction here, talks a little bit about how the sound system works in Heisla Kela. And he actually shows a chart here showing how all of the symbols represent the sounds. So you'll notice that he has them listed not in English alphabetical order, but this is called, well, there's a couple of different ways you could describe this. You could call this articulatory phonetics, which means it's basically the study of how sounds are made. That's what articulatory phonetics means, how sounds are made. It's the study of what happens in your vocal tract when you make different sounds. So you could describe it as that. You could also describe this as a place of articulation. So he's thinking about how each of these sounds are made, and he's grouping them together according to that. So B is related to P because they're made the same way. The only difference is that B is voiced, P is voiceless. And then there's a glottalized version of it here with the apostrophe on top of the P. So if you think of the sounds, it would be ba, pa. So these last two would be voiceless. This glottalized P would be kind of a popping sound. And then you have M, and then you have a glottalized M. W, U, has a glottalized U. So all of these sounds in this first row are all what he calls labial sounds. So labial means lips. So what he's describing here is the fact that to make each of these sounds, you start by closing your lips and then you open them to produce the sound. That's what labial means. It just means you're closing your lips and then opening them. So this gives you a really good idea of how different sounds are related to each other. You don't get that in English alphabetical order, because when you think about where B is in the English alphabet, it's towards the start. P is way over towards, it's past the middle of the alphabet. So since they're so far apart from each other, you would never know that they're actually related to each other. So that's why I really like this layout here. And this is what I teach when I'm laying out the sounds of the Heisla language. As it gives you a better idea of how the sounds are related to each other. So he has dental here. I would call these more like alveolar sounds. So if you think of that, if you think of your front teeth, your upper front teeth, if you go behind that, there's a little bump behind it. So what happens is that a lot of these sounds here in this row, the second row, are made when your tongue kind of approaches that bump behind your upper front teeth. So duh. Think about where your tongue is when you make a duh sound. Duh. So you're pressing the tip of your tongue, the back of your tip of your tongue against that little ridge. And then you're releasing the sound duh. So your tongue is in the same position when you're making all of these sounds. So that's why they're grouped together, it's because they're made the same way. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the grouping of the sounds. And then you see here, he has rounded sounds. So he has a G and a V. So this is gua. He has a KV, which is qua. He has a glottalized or ejective K and a V, so that's gua. And then an H and a V, which is hua. And he used a line over top of specific consonants to identify what is called uvular sounds. So if you think of your uvula, it's the little piece of skin that's hanging towards the back of your throat. So if you think of where that is, it's really deep in your mouth. So that means that these are really deep sounds. So that's what the uvular sounds indicate, is that they're deep sounds. Laryngeal just means, it refers to your voice box. Your voice box is also called your larynx. So these are laryngeal sounds, the apostrophe, the glottal stop, and the H. So those are the deepest sounds because they originate from your larynx or your voice box. So it gives you a bit of an idea of how the sounds are described and how he developed his orthography. You can see that he went beyond the English alphabet. He went outside of the English alphabet to represent some of the more unique sounds that we have in our language. So in chapter 1, he focuses on vowels. One thing that I will mention about this course is it is complete. If you look down here, there's 56 pages. So there's more than 50 lessons. So he covers all of the sounds. The unfortunate part is that, as far as I know, there's no recordings that go with this. There are recordings that go with his first course in Haisla. But again, that one is, for whatever reason, incomplete. But there are sound files that go along with a first course in Haisla, none to go with the advanced course in Haisla. I also don't know if he did like a middle lesson, like an intermediate lesson in Haisla. I'm not sure if he ever did that. So it seems like a bit of a jump to go from a beginner course to advanced without something in between. So maybe he developed something and it got lost. I'm not really sure. But in this first lesson, he focuses on the letter A. So he starts off with da. Da means to get or to take. And you can see a lot of these words just have the letter A in them, like us. You can see that there's no apostrophe in front of the A. That's what we would be using now. And if you're wondering why we use an apostrophe in front of vowels when they're at the beginning of a word, is because the apostrophe is considered to be a consonant. And I'm not sure if it was Heinrich that started to develop the rule of having words start with apostrophes in front of vowels, but that later became basically the convention that would be followed by linguists that came after Heinrich, is starting any word that starts with a vowel with an apostrophe in front. So one of the reasons for that is it's because since it's a glottal stop, there's no sound. If there's no sound, it can't affect the actual sound of the vowel. So it's essentially a placeholder. So since we can't start a Haisla word with vowels, we have to put something in front of it that doesn't actually make a sound or affect the first sound. So that's why we use apostrophes now in front of words like this. So this would be apostrophe AS, us, and that is soapberry. And again, sometimes he would put an A, whereas now we would put an E there. So this would be alkia, which means finished or stop. So there's some other examples there. Letter I, it tends to sound like E, which can be a little bit confusing for people that are not used to it. But as we saw in Heinrich's writing, there's no rule saying that I has to sound like I. it can sound however you want it to sound. So he was the first one that started using the letter I to represent an E sound. So this G-I-S sounds like geese, geese, which means on the ground, or geek, or geeg. I would actually replace this K with a G, geeg, geeg, which is tooth. So he has a lot more examples there of the E sound represented by the letter I. The letter E tends to sound like ah. So you have sums, or to sa, to push. Kita, that's this one here. Kita, to shoot with a gun. So there's more examples later on of the letter U. So this sounds like oo. The other thing that I'll mention is that the letters I and U can change in certain situations. Actually, all of the vowel sounds can change depending on the situations, but A and E have multiple sounds, like a number of sounds, more than two, whereas I and U have two different sounds each. But the way it's used here, it tends to sound like oo, so do means and. Dusa means to feel numb. Mula means pulp mill. Mudutlas means balsam fir. And yeah, you can see that he has a lot of other examples here of the letter U. And then he has the umlaut A, so ne, dead, sex, yeta, lestala, egya. So those are some examples of the A with the two dots over top of it. So there's quite a few other lessons here. So another difference is that he used the letter O. We don't use the letter O anymore. Now we use AU. And it doesn't make an O sound, it makes more an sound. So this would be up for father, muwas, which is 9. Wadi, kelp, woyala, a waterfall with a direct fall. This part can be a little bit confusing. I actually don't read it this way. To me, these are just words that have a schwa in them. That's another word for the letter E, is a schwa. So the schwa comes in front of M sometimes, in front of an L or an N. I would just list these as E words. So dunks is salt. Olam, a toy. Olamide. It's a creek that we call Toy Creek. And you can see he has some other examples there. That continues on into the next page. It takes a while before he gets into consonants. So that's chapter 2. You can see he has the letter Z listed first, and then C. He has the apostrophe. Then he has a glottalized M, glottalized N, glottalized L, glottalized W, glottalized Y. And then it gets into the lateral sounds here. So DH, TH, LH. So those are some examples of Heinrich's advanced course in Heislak. So the letter Z sounds like a D and a Z together. So this would be Zan. That's a harpoon for catching seal. Zatu means a divorce, or to a person left alone after a divorce. So those are some examples of Heinrich's first orthography. As I mentioned, they're very similar to each other, so I would classify them as 1A and 1B. His second orthography is where we start to see more change. So I would say it's different enough to make it a second orthography, to separate it as a different orthography altogether. So does anybody have any questions around that?
Do you have any plans on updating this lesson plan to the new orthography?
I did update his first course in Haisla. It is on the Haisla website. I updated the second one, which is called Let's Learn Haisla. I started to update the third language package, which is Box exercise book called Nuyem Event. But I was only able to get so far in that one. I converted the lessons themselves, but there's additional lessons that he has and some other explanations that he provides that I wasn't able to go through that document again, which is really lengthy. So it would take me quite a while to go through and figure out where missing accent marks would go and other things like that. So I do have most of the language packages converted. This one I started on at some point, but I got really busy with other projects, so I stopped working on this one. And this is something that I would like to develop more and convert all the spellings into the hybrid orthography and to make recordings for all these examples. So all this kind of takes some getting used to. And nobody actually taught me how to read Hindmink. I actually figured it out on my own. And how I did it was we had two linguists that came up and visited us. Their names are Fiona Shaw and Fiona Campbell, and I'm blanking on the other lady's name. Her last name is Shaw. And they came up here and did 2 sessions with us. And what they did was they taught us how to read Box orthography. I'd been kind of figuring out that orthography on my own. So having them here and going through it with us, going through his orthography with us really helped me a lot. And I really started to understand it better after the first time they came and visited us. They came a second time. By that time, I had understood Box orthography, and I was starting to study the other ones. And I was developing theories on how the orthographies work and how the language works in general. So my understanding of the language advanced by quite a bit in between those 2 visits from those 2 ladies. So that really helped me a lot. And then once I figured out Box orthography, I used that I basically compared his orthography to the other ones that were used by other linguists. So that's how I was able to figure out how to read Hindmink's writing systems, and also just realizing the fact that his orthography's changed over time. He didn't just have his first orthography and he didn't just leave it at that. His manner of writing changed over time as he continued to work with our language. So this can be a little bit challenging if you're not really used to, but if you have someone to actually guide you through, it is a really big help. And that's what I wanted to share with in terms of Hindmink, his first orthography. Next, I wanted to go back to something that Dustin was talking about in terms of when he was studying I believe it was the Wet'suwet'en orthography. And he's wondering why they use a K instead of a G sound. They use the letter K to represent that G sound. And I shared something with him that I'd read from a different orthography that's totally unrelated to anything else that I've studied or that I've presented here, other than, well, last week I had actually showed the Cree syllabic system. So that's what I wanted to share here. is I wanted to show where I found that information. So this is a document that I found called How to Spell It in Cree, the Standard Roman Orthography. So this is essentially the English alphabet. So I mentioned that you can use syllabics to write Cree, but you can also use what is essentially the English alphabet as well to represent Cree. So you can use either one. So when they use the English alphabet, they refer to this as Standard Roman Orthography. So this was written by, I'm not going to try and pronounce these names. I'm not sure how to actually pronounce them, so I'm not going to attempt that, but these are the authors of this document. So this was written in 2008. And you see the table of contents here. I can kind of skip past that. So I want to go into the introduction. So they talk about different aspects of the Cree writing system. Throughout the years, many different attempts have been made to write the Cree language using the Roman alphabet. This has usually been done based solely on some knowledge of English or French usage that has, as such, resulted in almost as many different spellings for one single word as the number of people trying to write it. And that's a big benefit of having a standard writing system, is that if you have one way of writing it, it's always going to be that one way, instead of trying to have people figure out their own spellings. Like when people talk about spelling it as it sounds, that's essentially like a phonetic spelling, which actually isn't accurate. It would be more of a phonic spelling, but they tend to refer to it as phonetic spelling, or spelling it as it sounds. And that's one of the drawbacks to that, is you can have many different spellings of one word. And then they continue on. For instance, records have been made in the 18th century in the area of Hudson Bay, gave a variety of spellings for relatively simple Eastern Cree words. For example, I'm not sure if this is Amisk, but this is beaver. And you can see here they have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 different spellings for that one word. Kakwa, I believe, is porcupine, and another 4 different spellings for that word. You have lynx, 4 different spellings for that. Now for mink or ermine, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 8 different spellings for that one word. So all of these variations point to the problems of using English letters to approximate the sounds of another language. Using the English spelling system consistently is difficult enough for English speakers writing English. Seeking to harness its numerous conventions and idiosyncrasies to consistently write another language with different sounds and therefore different needs is hardly possible for a single writer, let alone a large number of individuals working without a standard system. So that's something similar to what to Heinrich in his introduction to his first course in Heistha. There are drawbacks to just staying within the English alphabet and trying to write a different language down. So as an answer, I'm just skipping ahead here. As an answer to this problem, the standard Roman orthography has been designed and refined over the past 80 years, specifically to meet the needs of the Cree sound system. Though the SRO does utilize the symbols of the Roman alphabet, it is not based on the orthography or writing system of any other single language, and is most certainly not based on the English spelling system. It gets its name from the fact that it is meant to be the standard orthography for writing Cree, utilizing symbols of the Roman alphabet. The use of those symbols, however, is just as unique to Cree as the sound system it is meant to capture. So I'm going to look for the part where they specifically talk about the letter G and some of the problems that come with using that word or that letter to represent sounds. So here is a section they call what not to use. So in terms of English symbols, though there are dialect differences, there are 17 distinct sounds, and each of the plains, woods, and swampy Cree dialects. So they use letters to represent each of these dialects. So Y stands for Plains Cree, TH stands for Woods Cree, M stands for Swampy Cree. In order to represent these sounds, only 14 letters of the English alphabet are used to write Cree. The following symbols are never used for writing Cree. So you can see they have a B, D, F, G, J, Q, U, V, X, and Z. So some of these letters are missing from the Haisla orthographies as well. We don't have an F, similar to Cree, and we don't have a J either. So this next paragraph is where they start to dive into that more. So they go on to explain if any of these symbols are found in attempts to write Cree in the standard orthography, it is incorrect. As an example, the letter G is often chosen in attempts to spell Cree words in place of the correct K, as described in the next chapter. This is often justified. But what does a G sound like? Is it the G of Gil, or is it the J of Jin? Or is it perhaps the G of gorge, gorgeous, or garage? So you have two G's in garage. They both sound different from each other. You might well ask which one, and that is precisely the point. In English, when the letter G occurs before an I or an E, it is usually pronounced as J, or is elsewhere, though Gil is an exception, as it does not sound like Jill, while it has the hard G sound as an egg in other positions. But it can also be pronounced like the J in leisure or vision, as in some pronunciations of the second G of garage, or in the G of genre, and other borrowings from French. The letter G is simply too variable, misleading, and unnecessary a symbol to use in Cree spelling, and thus we never use it. So I'm just reading the comments here. So Pulhanik says, whenever you share about Cree, it must be very meaningful for all the Cree Haislas out there. I'm told there's quite the Cree Haisla population in Vancouver. Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. So, and that's one of the reasons why I like to study other languages, is because you don't know what you're going to learn. And I've come across a lot of things that I found are really similar to the Haisla orthographies that have been developed by the various linguists that have worked with our language, and some of the reasons why they chose these letters or symbols to represent the sounds in our language. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. So hopefully you found that interesting. I really was interested when I found that. And I don't know if that's why they use a K in the Wet'suwet'en orthography, but I would guess that that's a pretty similar situation to their reasoning as to why they use a K instead of a G. So again, I'm not saying that is why, but that would be my guess as to why.
There's quite the Cree population in Surrey, I think. It's like the biggest Cree population outside of Cree territory, I'm told. And I was talking to someone on the West Coast who's Cree, and I guess through the 60s scoop, a lot of Crees got moved to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And there was someone that I became friends with on Facebook because he was at a Haisla meeting, and was just getting to know him a bit, and like, whose family, whose own are you, doing the whole whose own are you thing. And I was like, oh, you're like the second Haisla Cree I know. He's like, oh, there's lots of us, there's so many of us. And because I know Christy Smith Windsor is part Cree, and that was like the only Cree Haisla I knew. But yeah, so it was really mind-blowing for me to see Kitimat in Cree. Like, oh, I want to send that to all the Crees I know.
Yeah, And that's something that I started to think about too, is that am I the first person to write Kitimat in Cree syllabics or in Inuktitut or the other similar dialects, or I'm pretty sure I'm the first person who's ever written it in the Chinook Pipa writing system.
Mhm.
So that's something that I take pride in, is that I understand enough of it. Like I have a basic understanding of those writing systems that I can do that. But that's another reason why I like to study other writing systems is I'm good with languages in general, but I would say that my specialty is written languages because I tend to take to them pretty well. And whenever I find something that is written that explains how a writing system works, I read it, I go through it, and you uncover all kinds of things when you do that. And it's just a really interesting journey to follow. So I think it's pretty cool.
I like seeing all the lists of the words. I'm like, wait, we had harpoons for seals? Just seeing all the things. I want to go back and like ask a bunch of questions just generally about our culture and our people and our history. They're so intertwined, the language and the culture and who we were. It just makes me think of things in ways that I maybe wouldn't have before. It's
Yeah,
very inspiring.
yeah, cool.
Yeah, I'm really
Like-
grateful to you, Ab, for doing all this like detective work. You get really deep into it, and really, I feel like you're helping us get to know our relative again. And I'm just really seeing the vastness. I can't even imagine the magnitude of work that you've been doing in the time you have to kind of go into such detail like you do. It's
Mhm.
really such a gift, and I'm just really grateful to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, throughout him helping me study, just in the last song that I had written that was in our language and Wet'suwet'en, I noticed when I couldn't really pronounce theirs proper, so I'd have to go to First Voices, listen to it over and over again. Then I found their writing system for it, and I converted it into our hybrid writing system just so I'd be able to pronounce it proper and do it justice. But I started noticing where we have vowel combinations, like in Honey we have the AI at the end where they have a what I'm assuming they have an apostrophe I-Y with an apostrophe at the end. So I was just assuming it was glottalized in some way, or modified in a way to make that one sound. Then where they had the accent marker at the end of the next word, and it had the same vowel combination, but it had an accent marker on ours in the vowel combination, theirs turned to a YE, but it makes the same sound as our accented AI. So those things that I'm actually, when I was studying those, I started looking at my partner, showing out what I was finding and theories that I was having on those combinations and why the same AI makes a different noise over here when it's not what I'm assuming is glottalized in some way or modified in some way. So it's really interesting when you're looking at the written languages. And I was thinking of this as you were going through Hein Vinks. I went over to a friend's house and he knew that I knew quite a bit about the orthography. And I was like, oh, yeah, I could show you a whole bunch of what I know. And then he pulled out Hein Vinks and I was like, oh, man, like the hardest one. But since I knew so much about the hybrid orthography, I looked at it. And when I saw the V's, I just instinctively knew what that was. And I was able to convert it to him and showing him what we use it for now and the actual function of the V. So it was really interesting to see how much knowledge I had at that time in orthography that I knew least about. And when I started reading that and knowing the comparison word, it was so simple to convert it into my head or write it out for him in the hybrid orthography. So it was like, I just really impressed myself with what I was able to retain from simply learning, I think, well, M and box first, and then the hybrid orthography after that. And then yeah, and we always did those exercises of going into other languages and trying to guess and stuff like that and seeing how far we were off on that. So all those things kind of come together to make studying other languages more specific for me, our neighbors' languages and the written orthography a lot more interesting. And then even that little connection about I made about our two languages that I was just talking about with the vowel combinations was really cool. So when I was showing that to my partner, it felt kind of like when we first started studying the language and you were first breaking the coding on it, as we would refer to. So you get that same kind of adrenaline and really good glow to it, eh? It was really nice. So again, thanks for everything that I've learned off you and everybody here. Last time when you left there, Ab, I was doing my thing on Oolichans and talking, and we talked about the Ziggins Ziggins Zay, and I forgot to mention to them about your Metallica song where you you did the From Whom the Bell Tolls, because Paul Knieks was just saying that it sounded like a song, and right away I smiled, and I thought that one was funny. And then I was
Where
thinking of
can
that
I find that? That's so cool.
he must have it in his old chats and the song that I made about Duke. We were doing language exercises, we called it, and we just put it in there for it to be fun, and we're sharing them back and forth, kind of conversing on maybe what we could put in more on my aspect, I guess. But yeah, it was really fun, and we got a good laugh at both songs, and not that we're laughing at each other, it's just really fun. And to hear our language when he was like Ziggins, Ziggins, and then in the guitar it's like doo doo doo. So as he played the song, it was really nice to hear it in that aspect.
Man, song
Yeah,
is
So
such a powerful way to learn language. It's like it's such a, I mean, we use it with kids when they're learning English, like
yeah.
different things. It's like such a powerful way. And I think of all the like Heisler Canuxia metalheads out there.
Yeah.
We'd freaking eat that up. That's so cool.
Well, I remembered the name of the other linguist. Her name is Patricia Shaw. So it was her and Fiona Campbell that came up here a couple times to go through some language workshops with us, and that was really helpful. That's really what got me going. Like my learning really took off after that, especially after the second visit, where I kind of confirmed the stuff that I'd like the theories that I had about the language. I'd run them by those two linguists, and they would basically confirm what I had in mind with my theories. And yeah, it was really an eye-opening experience, and that's kind of what started my whole language journey, is learning how to read Emma Bach's orthography, and ultimately led to me developing the hybrid orthography. And that really is the power of the orthography, is once you learn how to read a standard writing system, it empowers you. So I didn't limit myself just to Emma Bach. I wanted to learn all of them, and I did, because that's just what I wanted to do. And I always approached it with an open mind. I never approached anything saying, well, I'm never going to learn this. Like I didn't look at Emma Bach's orthography and say, I'm never going to learn Emma Bach's orthography. Because if I said that, what do you think would have happened? I never would have learned Emma Bach's orthography. So I allowed myself to actually start learning. I gave myself permission. I didn't stand in my own way. I said, I will learn this, and I did. So that's one of the biggest takeaways, is just having an open mind when you're learning something like this, because it can be really challenging. It can be intimidating and overwhelming. But if you look at it with an open mind and you take it a little bit at a time, and you have someone to guide you through it, it gets a lot easier. So yeah, those are my thoughts on orthographies in general.
I wonder how long, because I know when I asked you to look at when Easta was in town, and I was having a hard time pronouncing a lot of their words within their, especially because that sound that they have in theirs was so different. It was really hard for me to pronounce that. And I had asked for Ab to help me and convert. And not only did he help me, but he actually brought over a teaching tool on printed on paper. And he sat with Ista and I and showed him the comparison through the hybrid orthography, the songs or the what we would combine to make this equivalent sounds within theirs, and it kind of helped us basically support each other through making those sounds as we were sharing songs with one another. So that was really hard for me to, because we don't even have except for siwa, we wouldn't really have equivalent to that sound, and that's still not the same equivalent to what the New Hulk were, the sound they were using. So it's really interesting when you see how fast you can, especially you, decipher those different orthographies and come up with a teaching tool for it. That would have taken me a long time to even come up with the concept of separating the two, sitting down, especially within under a week's time. I think that was like 2 days. And yeah, I know you have a curious mind and stuff, but I don't know a lot of people that would actually have been able to make the progression happen so rapidly. You know what I mean? Especially you could really see your teaching background and the education you have for this, because I remember there was times where I was having a hard time as well, and you're able to basically make sense of everything. I just kick myself sometimes not asking you those questions, because when I was doing the handwritten ones and I was starting to find the coding, if I had just asked that question, I believe you probably would have brought me to the teaching tool that I was searching for, which was those connecting words at one time. But it must have felt pretty nice seeing somebody actually trying to decode it at all without reading what I already had access to. But I think that's one thing that when you did mention you allowed yourself to learn it, I read it too, the Emmett Bach, and I read it about 3 times, and I wondered why my brain wouldn't even take anything in. And I read it and I read it, and then until you read it to me and basically taught me this, when I went back and read it, it all started making sense. So I think you're absolutely right on, if you have no one to kind of walk you through it, it's going to be pretty rough. And when you have people to walk you through it, especially with all the pre-videos that you've made now, it would make it, like, as long as we went through the whole that department at that time when we were all working in it, that was the hardest it'll ever be. So from now on, all of these people probably don't even realize the ways they could relate the information so easily now, because we have material to go on to be able to teach. And not even that, we could just like literally pull your YouTube videos up, and if you want to learn our language, this is where I would start, because it's so easy and you're nurtured through it, is my point. And then once you do have the standardized writing, it'll never change. So once you know how to write it down once, you'll understand basically forever, and you'll never misunderstand. And I think the writing, even myself, there's still fine tuning, and depending on the age of the person, their personal accent, it might be pretty hard for me. But with the tools that you brought me up prior to that, I think it was on Audacity, when you showed me the different colors of the vocal track, where they're making those different sounds, where you can see the guttural pause because it gets voiceless and things like that. Like, all of that stuff's so phenomenal. Here, I thought I was bringing him cool tools, being like, hey, check this out. And he was like, no, let me show you. So basically, again, I was jumping right into something he's already researched. So again, maybe I should have asked those questions. So I encourage everyone that has the questions, or there is no stupid questions. I even asked and gave the answer in my question once. I asked him about it, talked myself through the whole answer, and I was like, now I feel silly. But it was a pretty funny memory that we have now.
So Ab had like a Rafiki moment, like a Lion King. It's like my job here is done.
Yeah.
He just like be there and like held the knowledge and just like let you find your way.
Yeah. That's so funny. We just watched Lion King last night.
That's so
Yeah.
mind-blowing to think of it in Audacity, to think of it in the like the sound waves. That
Mhm.
really blows my mind in terms of like thinking of how to learn and all the different ways that people, because people are often like, I'm a visual learner, or like I learn better through like story or whatever it is. So for all the visual learners out there to have the actual, I literally never thought of that before. It's really amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I felt when I first heard it. And then I was like, you got to check this out. And I thought I was bringing him a new tool. And then he was like, that's when he kind of reversed it on me. And he's already been so deep into it at that time. Go ahead, Ab.
yeah, that's something that I can probably do next week. I can give a demonstration on how I use Audacity to focus in on sounds and show the differences between them. I think that would be really interesting.
Mhm. I'm curious, is our language group, is it Waukeshan?
Yeah, Wakashan.
Wakashan. Wakashan. And is that 5 different communities or 5 different villages that have that?
Yeah, it's like Haisla, Hinaxiala, it's Rivers Inlet, Bella Bella, and the Kwagil Nations.
I was talking to someone from the Kwagwith Nations and she said they consider us a northern them.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, so I guess you're a southern us.
Did you really say that?
I remember my grandparents saying that they could go to their feasts and understand what they were saying a lot of the time.
Yeah, the dialects are pretty similar. There are some things that are very different from each other, but there's a lot of similarities. Like they both have the same sounds. Like all of the dialects in the North Wakashan language family, they all have the same sounds. It's just how they're used that's different, and the spelling can be different. Some of the words can be slightly different than what we use. Some of them are actually the same sounds, the same, not the same spelling, but the same pronunciation. Uh, the grammar is a little bit different. So those are things that I'm keeping in mind because I actually knew more Kwakwala than Haislikyala at one point. About 20 years ago is when I started studying Kwakwala. And I never really got like very good at it, but I was decent. I was a decent beginner at a decent beginner level. But it was still more than what I knew in terms of Haislikyala. And the fact that they have the same sounds like that sound, I knew what that sound, how that sound was represented, and I knew how to make it. So that was pretty easy for me to transfer over to Haislikyala when I really started learning it.
Mm-hmm. This is the shirt from the big house opening in Bella Bella. So
Mhm.
sitting in that big house for how many days, listening to speech after speech after speech and hearing them talk in their language, I was like super honed on it to like what they were saying. And I'm like, oh, that's our word for it. Oh, and when they came out and they did a song and they had Hamsa in it, I'm like, oh, we're gonna eat soon. How'd you know that? I heard it from spirit.
It's funny that you say that because there's a couple Bella Bella songs, and they were talking about how they were building a fire to eat soon. And something in the song talked about how the tears from their eyes graciously fell off their face. And I don't know how, it's like instinctively, I kind of knew this. And it was just when you hear the elders talk about our language a lot, they'll be like, what are you hearing? What are you hearing? And that's what I heard. Because you have to remember, there's no actual English equivalent to anything. Like our word was different, and even a lot of the words, what surrounds it changes it. So it could have the two meanings in one. So Ab had showed one word earlier on that had two meanings, and that's because of whatever words were surrounding it gives it, oh, I know for sure it's that meaning, not the other meaning, because it couldn't, like the language, whatever words are surrounding it would have to give it that meaning. And in that, so when they're saying, what are you hearing? Like when you're hearing Guelas, to me, it's a transition of like maybe let's say a being, a state that's transitioning to something. So Escuelas would be like good way of being till I see you again. I hope your being is well until I see you again. It doesn't mean goodbye to me in the sense of English, but that's the English equivalent to it. So truly, there's no English words that directly link to our language in a lot of the ways. It's the best ones that could describe what we're saying and the function that we're using, if that makes sense. So for one thing, you did ask a question prior. You said sometimes we don't have any literal meanings, and other languages didn't have any literal meanings to certain things. And that was one of the things that I wanted to explain at that time. Like, it doesn't literally mean goodbye to me when I'm hearing it now after being in the world of orthography and learning our language. It means, will your state be well till we meet again, or something like that. It gets harder to explain the more you start understanding our language, especially to find the English equivalents, because even our elders would say in our language, it was so much more beautiful, you wouldn't understand. And that's what I mean about hearing that person crying in that song and the tears like rolling gracefully off the face is what I felt that I heard in that song. But they were talking about building a fire to cook the food and to eat. So it was just really cool. And then I'm wondering, is that through sleeping through so many of my grandparents' conversations and waking up in the morning and listening to them talk? Do I know things subconsciously? Or, as you said earlier, is it creator or spirit giving us the guidance, or our ancestors whispering in our ears to give us a better indication of what we're hearing? So you could take our language has its own spirit to it, I believe. And when you're writing songs, they say you're not even writing them. One, it would be the spirit of the language. Two, your ancestors that are there giving you guidance through honing into something that's already on the wind, they would say. So our language works a lot like that. And when you hear the elders speak in their broken English, we kind of make fun of it sometimes, but that's the truest way that the functionality of our language is. There's evidence in that broken English that they speak. Okay, so it's really cool. That new document that I found about Jonathan Bolton and the first contact within Kitimat, they have documented the English of what the chiefs had said, and you could see within their English how our language works, which is really cool. And I hope to have some more teaching tools in the near future about that one document that I found, because it was really a really interesting document, and I want to actually take time, do some good Word documents and convert to PDFs and actually have a really good teaching tool before I start showing what's in that document. I think a lot of people would have their eyes open seeing how much our hereditary leaders, not elected council, had ensured that we had the reservation lands that we do, when they noticed that the government was taking this, that, and the other. They were the ones that came in and actually wrote to claim these certain lands. And it's really interesting knowing all these years later. And that was my great Well, that was my grandmother's grandfather, so I don't really know what that would make him to me if I'm going down on that type of scale. We would just call it our great great grandpa or something like that. But to see that it happened in my grandma's lifetime, knowing that was my grandma's grandfather, that was really cool. And this one chief, Seneched, how he went right from the kitlope, like he was the one watching these people as they were coming in or something, because he was in every single mention throughout these people's writings. Then the document had some really cool other places and other people that contacted Kitimat people and Kitlope people, and they tried to represent their language in really old ways as well. And it has a reference books that we can go look that up. So a lot of people from Europe had tried to represent our language as well. So I think that'd be really cool to look at that now and bring some of my work to Ab to show him. That way he's not doing all the language work on his own. all that study. It'd feel really nice for me to be able to bring him some stuff and be like, check this out, and even be corrected on things that I might not quite understand yet. Because for me, when I get corrected, my learning curve is really, really fast. And I've made a bad mistake with a, and there's one word that I've just ingrained in my head throughout time, and I can't convert those two sounds into the word. So to me, it's a speech impediment that I created through not fully understanding that combination at an early enough time. So someone taught me a word, and every time it goes back to that original way I was taught. So again, I've been working on correcting that one word for 3 years, and instinct still takes over. So when you're taught wrong the first time, you can imagine how long it takes, because you always thought it was right until you have a new understanding. And it's just hard to replace that now. So again, I've been on that one word for 3 years. And there's going to come an episode where I'm going to be able to say it with confidence. So well, I think we could take a break and come back. I'm actually really interested in seeing the pictures that Teresa was showing last time and talking about some gas a little bit down there. I have some other teachings of that area as well about the special potatoes that were gifted from the New Hulk people. And that gene of potatoes is still alive. And my cousin Russell knows the family that breeds it. I'm not too sure if Teresa or Megan met them as well too, but I think it's a nice talking point to the location. So maybe we'll come back at 8. How long do you want for a break? Like 8:30?
It's good for me. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
See you guys in a bit. Wow.
See you. Well,
Wow.
I got some photos ready.
Cool. Let's check them out.
It was her last Oolican camp. Mama, oh.
Nice. Look at those Wayus.
Look at the what?
Wayus?
What's that?
The grease skimmers?
Oh, is that what that is?
No, that's that board there. You guys separate the mash. So as the Oolican grease is cooling down, you put a board that is elongated this way. It can't fit perfectly like this and hold itself. It's wedged in that way. So you put it to the furthest point of your, I think it's some Gatsy. That's what your container for boiling the Oolichans is. Well, let me just draw you something. So that's your boiler.
Mm-hmm.
The board is probably an inch longer
Mm-hmm.
and you have to put it on an angle to start.
Mm-hmm.
Then you straighten this board down and pull it in the direction downwards, like you have it positioned here. You see the natural bend it has in your picture? That's because it's wedged in there, pulled back. And do you see how clear the grease is closest to us from that spreader board? And then you go behind it and you can see the Oolican mash. What you're doing is filtering out all of the Oolican mash that's there, and you're able to skim the grease without all those impurities. Yeah. So that one is just a spreader naturally in there. That's the aluminum one to hold it from encaving inwards. But if you go to that board that's in the grease, just down, yeah, right there, that's the board that I'm talking about, that you go like this and wedge it in, and then you pull it back, and it keeps all the mashed Oolichans on one side. And where you see, is that Madonna or is that Rose? That's Rose.
Rose.
She's scooping from, yeah, exactly where your little target is for your mouse indicator. She's scooping from that end, not that end, this end. Yeah. Yeah. So this end that has a little tiny bit of spreaded, you see how clean that grease is right under Rose's pot?
Yeah.
And you can see in front of Masachi, her side has the mash in it. And that's what that board does. It separates that mash from the grease and gives you a place to scoop the tlati out of with the wayus.
Mm-hmm.
So right after that stage, Rose would bring that to the purification room where they'd have the hot rocks. Then someone would purify that to the last bit of mash that's out there. Yeah, right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the most perfect picture to have set up right now.
Like, you mean this?
Yeah. So do you see theirs where you see that thing dropping down into it is holding a hot rock. And I'm assuming if that never flamed up, she's probably put maybe 3 or 4 hot rocks in, depending how many impurities in there. Or else a person just missed the flame that blew up right before that. And that's typically why they smile, is because the size of the flame, it always gives a shock value, how much flame is coming out on this first rock.
What do you think this person's doing back here?
They're doing the last skimming. So there's probably, if you see the first bucket here closest to the fire, that one's closest to the hot rocks. The one in the back one is cooling down now. So they would have the last stage of purification happening by probably the one that was most educated on that stage. So as you sit in a Oolican camp, to the people that haven't been there, there's a lot of expected of you, as you probably know already. Even the youngest have their jobs that they need to do. Nobody's out there basically for a free ride. It's a lot of hard work, man. Like, it's really hard work. And to see that the women are always the backbone of our community, and they're always the one to come in and do a lot of this stuff. Like, a lot of this stuff is harder than the fishing, I believe. It's a lot of work, and you have to keep going. Like I said, depending on the recipe of your camp, meaning how big your stim gas is, your boiler, your Oolican boiler, depends how many buckets of Oolicans per buckets of water you put in. It has to be about a perfect amount for the size of your container. You can't just keep on putting Oolichans in. It has to be the good amount for the amount of water that you're putting into your personal boilers. So my recipe.
Is it fresh water or salt water?
Fresh water. You wouldn't use salt water because it affects the blood content. It's harder to get out because now you're putting minerals into the tlati, the oil. That's why you can't go down to the saltwater beach and get the boiling rocks. They have to come from a place of fresh water. They can't have any cracks in it. There is a whole process in just finding that. And that's typically one of the first jobs that they would teach the youth to go through. And it's a stepping stool job. You need to be able to identify these, and you'd be amazed how fast you start digging down, finding the ones with deficiencies and being like, nope,
You already know, before you know it, you're bringing back some of the best rocks, and the elders will tell you about their experience with it as well. So again, when we go to these camps, they're a lot of hard work. Yeah, that's the equivalent to that tool that you have on
Mhm.
her right now would be the equivalent of a slaba, a chulbayu, which is, do you see in the fire, you see the firewood? We had pincers like this with cedar, a lot of the times with apple, like chiqua wood, and plum. So you would have U-wood pinchers, and that's what they would pinch typically until these tools were introduced. You would have a pinchers instead of those dipping tools that they now have modern time. And they would use a lot of the harder woods because if you did need to pick up those hot rocks with cedar, cedar would flame up right away. So you would want a more harder wood that would more just charcoal, and you'd be able to drop in the hot rocks. Then I asked my grandfather, before we had aluminum boilers, what did we do? You had to put hot rocks into that thing. And then they would actually use pine instead of cedar for the boiling process. It was able to heat up the hot rocks a lot hotter so that they would bring it to a boil in a better way. So I was always curious on what they used before this. What did they use before this? And I'm really glad I asked those questions because not many people know nowadays. So I would have a big bentwood box. They would have all their rocks, and then they would use a different tree than what they're using now. So even the trees and getting the wood was a different process. It was bad luck to get it the year before and prep for your boiling. It was against our natural laws, let's say. Our natural laws would say we don't prep until we have what we need. So once we filled up our Oolican bins, we would then go get our wood for boiling. And the cedar would have to come off a slope like this. It would never be a flatland cedar. It would always come off a slope. The flatland cedars hold too much water in it. They grow up, the roots and everything contained down here, all the roots pick it up. If you put it on an angle, that water rushes down to the lowest point all the time, and you're getting a lot drier wood in the core of the tree. So almost the same way they would test for canoes or to totem poles is to see if the center, they would use an adze chop down into the center of the tree. They would get the core of the tree, which would probably look like today if you cracked a carrot in half and you get to the core of the carrot. That's the piece that they were taking out to test at 3 levels to see if they'd make a canoe or a totem pole out of it, so that it was already dried naturally and it's not going to split in the drying process. You wouldn't get a canoe, or you wouldn't want to work on a canoe that was waterlogged like that and split naturally through the drying process. It'd be really hard to fix. You'd have to use a lot of different resins and stuff like that to fix that.
So we used to boil our grease by putting big rocks in the big bentwood boxes.
Yeah.
Wow. I was wondering about that because it'd be really hard to light a fire underneath.
Yeah, and that's what I asked them. So the first ones that I seen were converted, and there was remnants in Camano of those. They took the bottom of the box off and they put a almost like a tin sheet, and they made it so it was waterproof, and that's what they boiled with.
I think of like the mass amount of organization that goes. There's so many moving parts to pulling off like an Oolican season with like the wood collection and knowing how much, and the like knowing where to get it from, like all like getting the rocks ready, getting the containers ready, organizing food for people. Like there's so many. Just it because I do like event production and facilitation and I organize, these things. There's so many different, now I think of things in terms of like, oh, we would need a list for this, we need a list for that, and we need someone in charge of that part of it. We need someone in charge of like overseeing all the like transportation of things, someone to oversee like where everyone's going to sleep and if we have enough of all stuff for that, where like who's going to hook up like the fresh water,
That's why they said,
like where's the garbage going to go after, and like all like who's going to collect the rocks? Just can someone show them how? Like there's so many moving parts.
Yeah, and that's why you had a camp head at each camp. The camp head was the most qualified person, and they said the rules at their camps. So each camp had their different rules. Some of them, like in our camp, we had a dry camp where you couldn't even bring out recreational beer or anything like that. That would be not seen at our camp. I don't even know if they drank at other camps, to tell you the truth. I was young and I never even had that concept of drinking out there. So yeah, depending on all those different rules, and these days people think that everyone had the right to go and fish. All the people that are still holding those ways are Tlati people, they're Tzachwin people. They're the people that have done it and are trained to do it and know the rules that coincide with the Tzachwin. So the people that fished herring weren't the people that fished Oolichans. The people that hunted all the time weren't the people that were fishing herring. So if you see how our clans and the different areas of the accumulated Wachiwis, that's all of the Watwayases together. One of those pink ones is one Watwayas. All of them combined is a Wachiwis. You wouldn't have the hunting people doing Oolichans here. You wouldn't have the people that hunted in here coming in and doing Oolichans here. You would have these families that have held it, that have went down and down and down, that are properly trained to do that. So these days you see a lot of people bringing the Oolichans into our home, our village. When we're looking at some gas where they used to go, they would pack everything up, go into those villages and boil there on the land. That way that oil wasn't saturated within the soil around your house, where every time it rains, all that Oolican oil comes back up to the surface. Now, what does that attract?
Everything.
Hairs. Yeah, everything.
Mhm.
So that's one of the main purposes that we would pack up and leave to these specific sites, is because you remember what it was like when you hit the plug on those, when you've filtered out all of the grease and you get to do the sludge part, you pull the plug and it all goes down the beach. Imagine having to stay there for 3 more weeks when it gets hotter and the sun goes. So imagine what kind of animals come around to sniff and lick all of the tlati that's still on that. And as it's in there, just like any oil, it'll raise to the surface every time it rains. So now we have a quite the bad bear problem within our community, and that's one theory on why I think that the bears are going to within the community. If they could smell, let's say, 50 times better than humans, just imagine what that smells like to them. And anyone that knows what the boiling smells like, would you go boil Oolichans and come town side? Because they have no concept of what boiling the Oolichans would smell like, and it would be probably pretty offensive to a lot of people. To us, it's just normal, and it probably smells good to a lot of people because that's just what we grew up to.
Mhm.
But a lot of the protocols and procedures are held by the camp heads, which tended to be the chiefs of the community. And the chiefs were the ones to meet when the Oolichans came into the territory. They were the ones to say yay or nay on the fishing, on when you were gonna fish, and they were to ensure that there was no hunting, not one bit of blood can get in there, and that it was the calmest river. There was no work being done on it. So work is different than going upriver to get water. Water is a necessity. So you would have those leeways of being able to go up and do that. All the hunting happened after the Oolichans had run. Then you can go. That's when we got our beaver, our duck, and stuff like that. So what other pictures do you have?
This one is from just this trip. I'm pretty sure that it's one of Chris's. I just thought it was really sweet because it has Granny Vi in it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm just so happy she's
Like,
out there. She must just be like in her element.
well, she's got to be one of the toughest ladies I've ever met. The amount of bread she could make alone, you have to be tough to do that. Imagine getting punched by her. She's got
As
some
if,
oomph in her.
as if she would though. She's like, I love
Yeah,
you
I
with all my
know.
wasum. She's too busy
Yeah.
loving everyone with all her wasum to ever punch something.
That's why it was so funny. But
I
yeah, if you look
love
at
hearing
that,
like when people say that, love you with all my wasum. I'm like, oh, you're loved by Granny Bye.
that one there is a good example on every Oolican facing the same direction. It was taboo of us to have one of those Oolikans facing the wrong way, and you weren't respecting it. So there was teachings with just hanging those.
Wow.
It'd be nice to be able to get a group of elders that actually just have this off the top of their head. I do have it documented somewhere, and I know Teresa probably does as well. And the actual, if Coral was here, she would be able to jump in and say that. I think still it would be beneficial to have a third discussion on this as it's going on to see the different families do it and what we've done modern now. We kind of have to change our years we were trading, and we were lucky enough to have relations with the NAS people to be able to get those feeds that we used to get when Camano was closed. There was none returning for how many years, and we're lucky to have another Zahuan Bering Creek to the north of us that we had relations with people that were rich enough to share their commodities with us. They were rich enough to give us so much that our people were able to boil for themselves. Can you fathom that? Imagine how many Oolikans were transferred from there to our community in these ancient relations that we had, because that's why we still have friends and family within the other communities, is because of ancient relations. And this goes to show our best commodity we've ever had, because at that point, when they take those off the DOMs, those are the candlefish that's referred to. You could light the tail of that fish and it'll burn just like a candle.
Wow.
Yeah, so
A
that's what they
very
used to
delicious
use.
smelling candle.
Yeah. But it goes to show, like, look at the length of those cedar. So what that tells me is they actually went out to properly harvest for downs, meaning you have to have a plank. And if I'm right, those ones probably go to about here. That's the height of them. So for me, what that tells me is you had a chunk of cedar that was about this big that you're able to plank down first, that had no knots in it. Then you're able to make the kindling, the square shape out of it. Then you round them all off. That's a huge piece of cedar, and that's a skill on its own to be able to identify this chunk right here. This is for DOMs.
That would be
You,
such an amazing project for folks to do. Like I think of like how good that is for mental health and like anxiety even to like do something meaningful with your hands. It like
yeah,
one of the things that produces like serotonin and dopamine, and to do something so meaningful like that and just to make a big pile of them would be
yeah.
so meaningful.
Well, you would be amazed too at your knowledge when, let's say I'm not around. You'd be able to educate someone just like I'm doing, just in your own personal way to what you've been taught. And that's the thing. You take out someone that's less experienced, and this is how we taught our people. I myself haven't been into our camps in a long time. I'm allergic to Oolikans for one, but I can get in there and walk everybody through what I remember. And since we're lucky enough to be one of the camps to keep our recipe that we've written down, how many buckets we use versus how many water, I remember the whole process. I can actually go in there, and I believe I could facilitate a Oolican camp for Tlati and even smoking fish.
I wonder if that's the recipe. I'm like looking at that. Someone wrote something on that board.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. The catch is how many fishes you did, how many sets you did to fill your bin that year will show you how big the run was. And I'm not joking around when I remember the river going black. There was big clouds. Like one day it was nice and blue and greenish, bluish, and then one day it's dark black, and you're like, that's how many Oolikans are going through. And you remember the sound of those big giant sea lions breaching the water? That would scare me at nighttime when I'd have to wake up and go to use the washroom. Then right there is the river, and you hear them come through. It's like every single time I would kind of cringe because there's an animal out there that big within the water that's making that noise. So
I wonder
imagine
if something
people.
that we might have done would be to like to celebrate the Oolican season, maybe someone would make a kind of carving to like for how many boils or like how many like whatever, like something to do with Oolikans. I don't know. I just think that would be something that a carver would do each year.
Well, they must have had ceremony for it for sure, especially for the first ones that were caught. Like I know reading in one document, and Byron did it last year, that he tugged an Oolican up. So the first Oolican that was found, they basically got it, put a string through its gills, then they towed it up on canoe up to stimulate the run of the other fish.
Hmm.
So then there was girl teachings to it as well as you know, the to be a woman there and to be allowed to fish, you have had to have earned that. That was more of a taboo thing that the men were out there doing that. So speaking from my mom's words and listening to what she had to say, there wasn't too many women that were allowed to fish, and she was one of them. That since she grew up on a fishing boat, trained by probably one of the best fishermen from here to I don't know how far. He was a really great fisherman, Dan Paul Sr. She knew everything. So deckhands within Prince Rupert would have to go train with my mom so that they got the rookie experience of knowing what was expected of a deckhand. So you could imagine the experience she has directly to be able to go on to the punts, fish, and harvest. You don't see any pictures of any of them doing that anymore. There's might be girls on there, but it was my mom that was one of the first ones. And I'm not too sure how taboo that kind of was at that time as well, especially because you're coming out of a place of ancestral teaching to contact to, okay, we know how to do this, to a worrying point now. There's a worrying point for this, not only for the preservation of the Oolichans, but for the preservation of the knowledge and the proper teachings of the spirit of the Oolican, not how to chase it off. That's really big. I looked to our neighbors, the New Hulk, who had got theirs back, and they went to my understanding, a community meeting to talk about what are we going to do this year. That to me is beautiful. They're actually having a meeting about it to discuss. Now, I suggested to my friend I would let it run up for X amount of days. And if you're comfortable bringing it up in your meeting, coming from my experience, I would let them run for 4 days. Then get out there and hit it with the seine and get a punt for your community to be able to, or how many it to feed their community. But I said I would probably skip out on boiling this year and make sure that they're preserved and have a feed and celebrate with the community the bounty that has returned. So to me, that's proper etiquette there, coming from the region that my family comes from. So I can't speak for the Kitimat grease making of a lot of the pictures that Teresa was sharing were just profound to me. I can't believe they were doing that here. All my experience comes from Camano grease making. Then you see some people taking the Oolichans out of the territory to go and do their boils elsewhere. Hey? The reason I said, why don't we transplant Oolichans into a different one? And it's because what if these specific Oolichans had a bacteria that we introduced into a different watershed? That's something I never looked at or even thought of. So now that you're at a point of asking questions, there's people out there that can give more specific answers. And I never even thought about transferring a bacteria and introducing a bacteria into a river where it never existed prior.
Mm-hmm. It must be so specific where they go, when, and why.
Yeah. Well, Byron's, he says he doesn't know a lot, but you see on the last one, he brought so much knowledge to it that even I don't have. And he's coming from a place of data where they're actually catching this stuff now. Up until the point they did that we got monies to research the Oolichans, and I can't remember how many $1 million were put aside to do the new studies. They're actually finding it in bycatches. So what a bycatch is, let's say a prawn fisherman went down deep, they put a seine net out and dragged the bottom. I don't believe they are allowed doing that in BC, but for example, if that did happen, all the other fish that they're fishing for, if they're fishing for prawns, everything else that they're catching is called a bycatch. So they could release the octopus, they could release everything else in there, and then you get Oolichans, they would release them. Now they have to put it down onto pieces of paper, according to DFO, to be able to track what's there and when. So all the information that Byron's getting is new updated information that has never been received prior to the study of the Zachwin. Now we have data to back up any of our ancient teachings. So look at what Teresa brought in her study. I didn't know any of that stuff, where she said the temperature of the creek, or how stubborn they are about going up, and then where the eggs sit on the creek. I had no idea of any of that stuff. And you could see the difference that one person could always make, even when they think that they probably don't have that experience on it. They really have a lot to add still, because I was just curious about that as well, and she answered many of my questions. I've never seen a baby Oolichan that I could recollect. I tell you the truth, I haven't even been into Camano in the summer. I've always wondered what it looked like in the summer, what it'd be like to jump right off that little cliff out front of my Baba's camp, or my mom's camp now, my family's camp, I should say, and just experience it out there in the summer. Like, that'd be so cool.
Mm-hmm.
We did tell Rediscovery that we have a plot on the beach that we would like to do a camp out there for. And imagine being able to play all the games that we play for Rediscovery out on Camano Beach. That'd be the perfect beach to do it. Then to go into underneath those big cedars that are there, have the camp set up there for a springtime camp to right into the fall. And it's safe from animals as well too, which is a big plus.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Teresa, is there anything you want to share before we start wrapping up? Are you still there?
Still here. My little one, it keeps waking up whenever I pass him over to his dad. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, when you're asking whether or not we had a celebration, and in this book, it's called Who Are the Haisla? I don't know if you could see it. I'll take my blur off of here. This is the way it looks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, in this book, it says that the elders rigidly controlled fishing, and only the chief could go test fishing for Oolican. And when he got enough for a feast, he would call the whole tribe for a feast, and that was just an excuse for a get-together. And only after that he gave the signal, and then everyone raced for the best spot. The best spots were converting currents, so everyone raced for those spots. And most often that was just part of the fun. The chief would make the call, usually early in the morning, and then everyone raced for their canoes, and they had made certain that everything was ready. The poles were ready, the piles were ready, and the nets were ready. And then in this document, it just talks about like how long they spent time. Like they spent all of their winter months prepping for the Oolican run. So the women would be weaving the nets, and the men would be carving the canoes during the winter months. So there was never like downtime in preparation for Oolican harvest or fish harvest. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then also in here, what I thought was really neat was that they have a name for the bundles or tools used to make Oolican nets, and it's Yakaju. So I thought that was pretty neat. And it says it was made of yellow cedar. But yeah, I have to tend to my little one. He's really fussy without me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
I do have a little presentation. Well, the end of the presentation I was going to share with you guys. I'll hold on a second.
I think one thing I would really like to see is one day I will be holding the one of the sharing part of the wet ways. And I think the holder to that one now is Patrick Robinson. And imagine if we just went through those protocols and asked permission to come harvest again. Saying what clan you're from and asking permission to come and celebrate the run by harvesting.
Teresa, maybe you can share this with me later, and if you're okay with it, I'll include it in next week's email to our little group.
Okay, so this was a learning tool that Megan Metz had put together, and she compiled data about the consumption of tlati at one point. So the average adult would consume about 38 liters of tlati per year, and a child would consume about 19 liters per year. So I really think that's mind-blowing when you think about the consumption rate, but also kind of, you know, it's a bittersweet statistics because you think about how much we don't have now and how we're limited now to even just like sharing a quart jar with our family and how long we have to make that stretch. And even like the amount that it costs now. So the population of Kitimat in 1947 was 413 people. I believe we're now past 2,000 on and off reserve. And total consumption of tlati would therefore be 11,602 liters, leaving 8,158 liters surplus for trade with other nations. So imagine that at one point that we were so abundant in Oolichans and tlati that we would have that much surplus for trading. This surplus is a conservative estimate of tlati produced only at some gas. So that's not even including all the other Oolichans and grease making sites in our territories. So it should be noted that tlati was produced at other sites in Kanaxila/Haisla territory. So this amount was definitely a lot higher. Oh, my bad. I thought I had another slide that talked about, oh yeah, right here. So the trade value of tlati, because it was used as a trade commodity among our people, Haisla and Kanaxila were among the few producers of this valuable resource, but also we were very like notoriously known for the unique technique of purification that we had. 95 liters of tlati would purchase either 4 or 2 beaver skins, or 2 boxes of dried halibut, or 28 bricks of seaweed, and 190 liters would purchase a canoe. Tlati was traded with Hartley Bay, Alaska, Bella Bella, Haida Gwaii, Klemtu, Kikatla, Kitsless, and to the interior of British Columbia by both land and water routes. And there's also oral historical sharings. I think it was the late Charlie Shaw who had shared, remembering hearing the late Annie Paul, also known as Mugafti, that she had memory of being a young girl and traveling to the Great Lakes because her parents or grandparents had they were trading with the Chief Pontiac. So our trade route went far and wide, and I think because it was such a large commodity and that was our main trade commodity, that's probably what we were trading for. And I think the as the story goes too, that what they had traded in return, they got a horse and they came with the horse as far as they could back up north. So I thought that was pretty neat. But yeah, that was like the last of what I wanted to share from that presentation, was just those statistics that I thought was really cool. And of course,
awesome.
just to drool over.
It's so baffling to think of what we traded.
Yeah, it is.
Like if you think up and down the coast, oh, we trade for seaweed, we trade for canoes, but like what would you trade in the Great Lakes? Like some kind of like, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know enough
Beads,
about
tobacco, sugar,
maple syrup, maybe?
corn.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
we even
maple syrup.
I think we even traded and had access to caribou, because in the book I've been reading, The Men of Medik, they talk about having caribou in that area. So I think at one point caribou was something that we probably would have traded with as well. And caribou probably migrated as far up north as here. And then this one I just really love looking at too, because I think it encapsulates the importance of Oolican. Lyle Wilson's art piece of showing the Giltlanoof, the canoe mountain, where the sun sets on the mountain across from our current village, indicates the time that the Duckwin or the Oolican are arriving. And then he shows all the different animals that thrive and feed off of the Oolican, and that are also signs of the Oolican arriving. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So amazing.
But yeah, that's all I wanted to share. Thank you for listening.
So just quickly bring you into some gas. So I'm estimating a lot of those villages being right in here. And when the first farmers had came here and some of the first contact had happened, this was our potato fields. We had a lot of potatoes that were here that were gifted by the New Hulk people in ancient trading. So you could imagine when they gifted us this bread potato that flourished in our region. Now, if you come into here, the last people to boil in the area was right down in this creek coming off here, and it comes down into here. And that was the Maitland family. They had the last boiler within the area of Kitimat, and they're the last people to put their boilers out, right as where we know as Minute Bay. And they used that one creek. When I worked at the Elder Center, the reason I know this is because Myrna Maitland had told me about her family that had and it wasn't just her family, just the Maitland family. I think there was Halls in here, and I'm not too sure who else, but there's a bunch of families that boiled in this area. Also, when we go into Gildala, I think you could still see some cabins that are around this area somewhere. And that's where they used to boil their Oolichans in here in Gildala. So imagine when this creek was Zachwin Bearing Creek as well. And what we found out last time through Teresa's was that they were in Foch Lagoon as well. Then they're in Simano, which is now known as Camano. And I'm not too sure if I've heard them being fished within here, but there is one map where they call it Zahuilatsi. Oh wait, Zahuilatsi is right here. So this is where they fish the Oolican and had their Oolican camps around here somewhere, as according to one of the Kitlope map. I'm not too sure who created that map, but it is in our language, and that's what they call the Tsakolatsi. So the Atsi is a place, like a place that's containing. So I'm not too sure if they went up this river here or if they just went up this or both rivers. I would have to just have the general assumption that they went up this river as well. So those are some of the ones that I know of. I'm not too sure what other ones would have been out this way as well. But if you're thinking that we're trading with people in Alaska, you can imagine going all the way up here into Alaska and trading. And when you come into the Kitlope, you can actually see we have copper shields. And the copper shields on the petroglyphs, I believe, we personally had in the Kitlope. So when you came into the Kitlope and you saw the copper shields in the petroglyphs, that's what I believe them. It identifies to the people coming in that we had copper chiefs there. So we had copper smelters within the Kitlope as well too. They just would do it in little tiny holes, hand dug holes, and make their kilns and stuff, and basically blow air into there, melting the copper. I don't believe we mined copper in a mass scale. I believe it was free floating copper. So when they found that green vein, they would be able to pull that stuff out and melt it down. And that's what they made what they call primitive copper with.
What makes a camp good? Like, why would they choose those specific spots in the territory to set up Oolican camp?
It's away from the community. It's away from occupancy. Only some people stayed in the winter in Camano. The other ones went up to Crab River. The reason we have the reserve at Crab River was because they applied for that. Because even in my grandma's and my grandfather's day, when you got to Nawakala, it was frozen over and iced in. You wouldn't be able to travel by ocean. But once you got down to Crab River, the ice would stop and it wouldn't freeze. The ocean wouldn't freeze, and they were still able to travel freely. So the Camano people would get out of there unless they were the ones that were going to stay at those camps. The reason that we would travel to them and not take them home, again, is for a lot of safety. You imagine the parasites that sit in the slush that they rip out. So when you pull the plug on your boilers and all of that stuff is breaking down over time, how many parasites do you think even live in that you wouldn't even think of? So the reason we wouldn't stay in our boiling points of even in Camano, are we wouldn't bring them to our home and boil there. We had our camp specifically for that, so it was away from the community. So where our camps were up creek is where all the boiling camps would be, and we'd go back to the beach and not have all those attractants around.
When we
I came
traded,
across this post that was being shared by a lot of our New Folk friends and family, and it was from a book called The Beaver. And in this book on page 32, they share a screenshot of it, and it talks about how Felicity Walkus of Ballacoola says that they never had Oolichans in the beginning here. They had to go all the way to the other side, out to Knights Inlet or Kingcome, or up north at the other bay of Kitimat, the Kitlope. This couple that had twins took a male and female and towed them from Kitlope next to Kitimat all the way to this place, 250 miles by sea canoe. And that's when they just showed the Oolichans the way to go to Ballacoola. So they believe that these twins and this couple guided the Oolichans back to Ballacoola or New Folk territory. And that's how they got Oolican there. I thought that was pretty neat. And then one more fact I'll throw out there before I go. I thought it was really interesting to find that maybe that was one thing that we traded with the Plains people was tobacco, because there was a remedy for lung infections that was a combination of black tea and tobacco. that was mixed together as like a poultice and rubbed on the chest. And that was used to extract or stop lung infections.
Wow.
So you see in that story, the twins of the fish clan, it would have to be a fish clan that did the ceremony to bring the Oolichans to show them the way to Bella Coola. The first fish typically caught, the twins would always come out from the salmon clan and they would do the salmon ceremony. And this is throughout our whole Waukeshan family, I believe that to be a norm where the twins are always doing that. So the polarities of the twins were very sacred, very, very sacred. And what I know about the New Hulk now is since they had mass plague like we did, mass sicknesses, they lost their clan system. So they still have revenants and evidence of the clan system. They've just, I don't want to say abandoned to preserve, but they gathered all their people up right away to save them. And luckily, that Nuyem Event, I believe, was the man that gathered all the people to save them all. And that's what the Chief Putla song is about. So they've, to my understanding, lost their clan system. And this is ways that we would potlatch too. We wouldn't just feast. We would have our celebrations and the dances and stuff like that. This is where it gives me precedent to look at our two communities that used to be so intertwined, never had any stories of war or anything, to come back together to reteach them these of what we're both missing. We're missing the potlatching part of it and the dances, the performances. They're missing the feast hall and clan system part of theirs. I'm not saying we go in and, but we could have these discussions now. And what a magical time to be able to have these discussions after their people have saved theirs, our people have saved ours, and we're in a time where this is why I love rediscovery so much, because everything I do, I've equated to rediscovery in my experience. And if it wasn't for rediscovery, I don't think I would have discovered anything. Like it was just so fast of rediscovering a lot of things. And now that we're in a time to actually rediscover a lot of stuff like FOIPA and stuff, if we start filing for the freedom of information on what all of these people have documented on our people that aren't in publishings and the universities and stuff yet, we're going to get so much information. And we'll probably find evidence of Mukakdi going down to see Chief Pontiac. Imagine on their end if they have anything documented on Khaisla or the Kitlo people. It might be documented on their end, and the reason we don't know about it is because we're living in an information age where people have to know how to apply for the freedom of information and stuff. Once those links are made, we might have a huge thing. And imagine going out there, finding the family that descends from Chief Pontiac and saying, I'm a relative of Mukakdi. Bringing some grease that used to be shared amongst those fires and having their version of powwow with them being invited there, and then in verse inviting them out here to celebrate with us again. Imagine that ancient alliance that was once there. And Teresa's right, we did trade tobacco with a lot of those people. We actually had pipe carriers within the Kitlope and Haisla, and they won't talk about it because after contact, it became a very taboo thing. Like you're playing with magic, you're playing with things that you don't understand. No, it was, we understood these things and you guys greatly did not understand them, and you classified them in a way that shouldn't have been spun that way. So now that we're in a day where we could talk about these things again and have events like this, imagine one of their descendants finds this YouTube video. That's what these mean to me. You never know what's going to happen. What if our Southern Quagule family starts contacting us to be like, hey, we need to potlatch again. We need to feast again. We need to get into each other's communities and teach everything about everything. This is Teresa mentioned it before. Sometimes we have to look at that community to get back what we once had in the most purest way. We were of the same. We call our village people Gyukulut, we call them Gwelut, the people that are the same as us. In the same ways, we have the same ceremonies, the same concept of the salmon clans, having the twins in there. Then you have the introduction of the blackfish around all of these, or if it's not the blackfish, it's the helchinuk, the killer whale. So there's so many connections that our generation's gonna make. And imagine our ancestors following us being able to witness that. That's what I find as beauty.
Mhm. Are you getting a text?
Yeah.
An electronic smoke signal?
Yeah, no, it's actually one of my elders. He needs a help tomorrow doing something, so I actually just bumped into him. He gave me some information I was searching for, so a whole new breath of life back in. To me, the time you're able to spend with the elders now, you'll never be able to replace. If there's anyone out there listening to me right now, my biggest advice to you is sit with your elders, learn those stories, learn as much of the stories as you can right now. Learn as much knowledge as you can and concentrate on learning from them. You're going to see a life in them when they get to teach what they weren't allowed to, for one. Now it's interesting. Now they're seeing how interesting it is, and they're seeing somebody's spark in their heart just go boo. Yeah, you're really excited. You need to do this, and you need to. Now I need to know this because I don't know that. I'm interested in that. And where do I go to find this knowledge and get pointed in the right direction for all your answers to be found? We have such a limited time with our elders right now that it's worrisome to me, you know. We're going to have a direct link of those ancient stories gone within our generation. We're witnessing it now, you know, and to be able to go and talk to those elders, if I had one whole shot at rewinding time, I would have been documenting a lot more what I had time with Dan Paul and Edith Paul. There would have been so many questions that I never even fathomed. Now, I'm lucky enough to have developed relationships with the elders within our community that I can have traces and have those conversations. You know, that Huilbayu, that tool that I talked about, I just got taught that 2 days ago in Save On. So that's how relative these teachings are, and that's how easy they could be passed on. Now they're in a place that's going to be preserved until there's no more internet or until they take down YouTube altogether. You know, at least it's preserved for our people to be able to. And anyone that wants to know about Nuyem, when they type it into Google, this is popping up as a suggested thing. So they have this capacity to learn at their own free will, which is just mind blowing. Imagine our generation had a YouTube and we're like, oh, we don't know anything about that. Let's go check out what we could find on YouTube. Now they have data, which to me, we're all doing our job. And we're handsomely walking as Haisla, Hinaxila, and whatever other lineage that we have within our blood, you know. So yeah, these things are always so fun to me. I look forward to the next one. I actually I wrote it down to make sure to ask Coral to get our pictures from our camps so we could show some of those and talk about that. And like I said, in the future, once Ab has time or whoever with the camera, we can go into the bush and I could get Duhua and show many different treatments on different areas of the body so that people don't have to just go like this, close their eyes and hit. I'll show you how to concentrate it, how to hold it proper, what it's doing as it's reacting. So once we have this video stuff, we could put it onto here and then have a platform for actually practicing responsibly, because if you're never taught by someone who knows, you're never taught basically by anyone who knows. So when you have someone that's willing to do that, taking all the safety measurables and making sure they're safe and having people understand it, right? My biggest thing is doing an allergy test first. Why would you inject yourself with any sort of anything or drink anything without knowing if you're allergic to it first? So, you know, it's be good to be walked through it gently. Well, looks like time has gone on a little bit longer, but it was really good talking. I could see the life in everyone as we talk about this. So again, I have to thank you guys for your support. I learned so much from you guys as well. Don't ever think that I don't. It's amazing where our lives have taken us and what we're doing with it now. So it's my honor to be here with you guys. So well, thank you. And I think you could lead us out there, Polchaniks.
Yeah, thank you as well. Thank you for sharing so much and for kind of being the catalyst behind this. It's so meaningful and it just continues to ripple out. It completely defines like the week to come for me. Whatever gets shared here will, yeah, totally inform my next week. So giving thanks for the spirit of the Jahwin, spirit of the Oolican, in our blood memory, in our stories, in our origins as people, all the ways in which that our little relative has had a big impact on the story of our people, all the ways in which it has touched and influenced every part of our lives, every part of our story, and giving thanks for the ways in which it continues to bring light and goodness and connection to the hearts and spirits of our Gikulut, of our people, all the ways in which it uplifts us and holds us, and honoring and giving thanks at this time for our Gikulut who are out on the land right now, being with the Jahwin, being with the waters, being with the elements, being in the cold, being with each other as we continue our story as a people, giving thanks for their hard work and for their dedication and for that light inside of them that guides them and holds them. May they be upheld, may they be well, may they thrive, and honoring and giving thanks for all the ways that ripples out into the hearts of all of our community, all the ways in which we're lit up by the coming and returning of the Oolican, and giving thanks to the Oolican for journeying back into our story and into our lives, and for all the things that supported that journeying back of the Oolican into our homelands and waters. May we continue to uphold our end of the agreement, whatever that means, in this journey, this intertwined connection with the Oolican, and giving thanks for the coming together of minds and hearts and energy fields as we share, like we do, stories of the Oolichans, questions about the Oolichans, all the ways in which that it inspires more questions and more curiosities, and giving thanks for that spirit of curiosity guiding us, lighting the way, and how questions lead to more questions as we unravel, as we untangle and breathe life back into all the places where the spirit of our ancestors continue to shine through us, and giving thanks for our homeland, for the place where the mountains meet the ocean, for the shifting of the tides, for the cycling of the seasons, and the ways in which this informs and inspires and defines our people as we lived in rhythm with the land, and honoring that place of connection that remains in the hearts of the people in a good way, in a loving way, in a sacred way.